Hello, welcome to PQ, the one and only Pokemon Cube podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Martin, brought to you with co-host Connor Lavelle. Today's episode is called Big Balancing Blunders, and we're going to be talking about some of the biggest mistakes we make when balancing our cubes, and get into some of the rationale behind why we make them. Before that, though, let's get into some news and updates. As far as news goes, somewhere far off and not too distant future, we're going to be hosting live streams every other week, basically on the off weeks of the podcast. We'll be live. More information about that to come, but just wanted to make sure you guys are aware. We are trying to do a little bit more Twitch content, and speaking of which, we have new emotes. So if you haven't seen the recent streams, we got some new emotes for you. My favorite being the Pop That Chode emote, of course. So definitely check that out. We've had some really fun live streams. We did this one past weekend with OmniPoke streaming his all gas no bricks cube, which is a ton of fun. Lots of that's still up around the channel, so you can come check that out. And of course, don't forget about the PCube series. There won't be one this week because of the holidays, but on Sundays, you can expect a nice Cube tournament to enjoy your Sundays with. So if you want to participate, they're free. If you just want to have a nice chill evening and watch some Cube, live streams are always going to be up there as well. So definitely check us out. Trying to do a little bit more Twitch content and don't want you guys to miss it. As far as updates goes, as far as Cube League goes, we are in the new Cube League season right before Champs Cube. Best Pals Coin Flip Cube. I am not participating this time around just because I have some stuff coming up that I have to get done. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be any shortage of Cube content. Connor, however, is participating, so I wanted to get an update from him. I think you're 2-0, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I am 2-0 right now, so off to a good start. Draft this time went pretty well. I was able to get a lot of stuff back late. I was able to... I don't know, just generally had a pretty good drafting experience. Only big miss was a Delcatty EX. I tried to wheel a Delcatty EX. It would have been so strong in my deck. Did not get it in the end, but I was really happy with the deck that I was able to put together, at least after after a little time passed. This was another case where I was like, I don't know how I feel about it, but it came together in the end, so that's what matters. And it's been treating me pretty nicely. I'm playing a really aggressive Arcanine deck. It uses some really powerful basic fire attackers and has some pretty huge power play stuff between like Stark Mountain, Mewtwo Delta, AZ, just lots of different ways to do unexpected things and produce a lot of damage out of nowhere. I know in game 2 of my last match, my opponent hit me for 40 on turn 2 and I responded by dealing 80. Oh
my gosh,
and that was my turn too. So that's the kind of tempo the deck is able to move at, and one of the biggest reasons why I think I've been able to succeed with it this time around. But looking forward to the rest of the event and feeling good.
Yeah, Arcanine seems to be a pretty popular, high placing deck right now. I know Benjamin Groves right behind you at 2-0. He's also playing Arcanine, so kind of noticing a trend here. The Arcanine deck seemed pretty good.
Yeah, I think build quality varies on it because it was really popular, like you said, and I think in some cases it came together really well, and in some cases not as well. Notably, I will say damage buffs are I would say really critically important for the archetype. Otherwise, you barely miss so many knockouts. So I have 2. I know some of the Arcanine players have like a Fortress tech with Thorn Tempest, which is really good. And some have like Cherim and Aerodactyl. It's what I have. So just different ways to get that damage. And I think without that damage, Arcanine does struggle with a lot of different matchups. So I'll be interested to see how the different builds shake out and how they continue to do throughout the tournament. But no disagreement that it is definitely a popular one.
And I just kind of wanted to plug real quick our Twitter. We're starting to post a lot more Cube League specific content, so if you want to get any like statistics on the drafts or also seeing maybe like the bracket and what decks are doing well during the weeks, definitely check us out. You can follow us at PKMN Cube Podcast. Links are in the description. We'll have a lot more information there about the Cube League stuff. We can't really cover it too extensively in the podcast, otherwise this would be like a 4-hour episode. So if you want more of that kind of, it's also more visual. So if you're more of a visual person and want to just see more of like what the best decks are, definitely check that out. Trying to give more light to the Cube League because it is a very interesting take on cubes because you don't traditionally get as competitive an environment. So to be able to do that, provide that, it's honestly one of the best things for the league. So definitely check that out. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware. But awesome. Glad to hear your 2-0. Hopefully, maybe you can break the finals, Gaff.
Yeah, that would be pretty nice. It's been a while since I won one, but the finals and I have been good friends over the last few months.
Yeah.
And it was last time I won was like September or October of last year. So it's been a bit.
I think being able to do consistently well, though, getting at least in the top placements is like still a very good feat considering the amount of variety you have to do with Cube League and the high skill cap too. It's very hard to get into even the top 8 for any given Cube League now.
Yeah, I am far from dissatisfied with my finishes or anything like that. Like I can't complain too much, but I would like to win.
Yeah, understandable. So I'll be rooting for you, keeping the P Cube team going on your own.
Yeah, I'll try and win it for both of us.
Right. This is just a reminder that Champs Cube is coming up in a few months in August. We don't quite have a date set yet, but just make sure you are aware. That'll be a very cool event to stream. Everyone's worked super hard to get their invites. There's actual money on the line that people can win. So it's definitely one of the most exciting events that happens in the Cube League. Also, just kind of an update for people in the Discord. The new Team Challenge Cube should be up by the time this airs. Connor, do you know which cube that's going to be?
New Team Showdown Cube will be Slower Cars Cube, which is a cube we've run in the Discord a ton of times before. I think it's probably one of the best cubes ever made. Low power, Gen 3 focus, but not a block cube. Like it has cards from outside of that range. And it's just super complex, and it always has different decks coming out and succeeding, and I just think it's so cool. And a lot of fun to draft as well, so I'll be really excited for that one. And then that'll be the end of this season, will be that cube.
Yeah, so anyone who's listening to this that is participating in the Team Showdown, there you go, Slower Car 42's Cube. And if you are listening to this and have no idea what we're talking about, definitely check out Team Showdown in the Cube Discord. It's a lot of fun. It's a 3v3 style of an event where you and 2 other teammates kind of collaborate together and draft against another team. So it's a very fun take on Cube. It's really low key, not really a huge time investment like some of the other events. So if you're looking for a fun way to get involved in the community, well, there you go. But without further ado, let's get into this crack-a-pack. We are doing one from Best Pal Al's Cube. Connor, what do you got for us?
All right, so I have got a pack that I think is pretty difficult and a pack that I think is pretty fun. So Andrew and I have not talked about this one at all in advance, but here it is. So a special Darkness Energy. This is from the Neo sets, so it does apply the extra damage to non-dark Pokemon at the cost of essentially being poisoned. Bug Catcher, which in this cube is just draw 4. Floatstone, a Cyndaquil from one of the Heart Gold or from one of the Diamond and Pearl sets with Tackle and Live Coal. Unknown Z with Zoom that gives all of your unknowns in play free retreat. Thunder Mountain Prism Star, Seeker, Kabutops with Primal Shell and Chop Up, Cherub with Sunny Day, Sunny Sweet Pollen and or Salty Sweet Pollen, I think it is, and Solar Beam and AZ.
Okay, yeah, no, this is quite the pack here. I honestly am struggling just a bit to come up with my first picks here. So I'm kind of looking at it. I mean, I think as far as like draw supporters go, I mean, Bug Catcher's totally a fine pick here because it's just a draw 4, which, I mean, comparison to something like How, which is draw 3. I mean, draw 4 actually does offer a lot of utility. Floatstone's really nice because of the unlimited utility you get out of it. It's one of the best tool cards as far as retreating goes. So Floatstone's definitely up there. Unknown Z is a little bit interesting because in the unknown specific deck that we mentioned on our live stream was one where you're pivoting, you're using like almost like an unknown / kind of dock style deck, but that gives you like tons of mobility, so that could be good. And the Thunder Mountain for decks like Jolteon and Lantern is really nice. There are multiple copies of them though, so this isn't be your only opportunity, but it is a really good card for making your attack cost really cheap. Seeker and AZ are both really good pickup effects. I really like AZ just because it combos really well with stuff like Arcanine. That's going to let you reset attacks like that. It's going to let you heal stuff too. So if you have something that's like maybe really damaged and its liability, you can pick it up. It's a really nice card. So those cards are nice. And then Kabutops, really nice item lock from the front. I mean, it's got one of the most like disgusting Poke bodies. So main in the act, you can't play items, and Chop Up can be really sick attack. I'm not too high on fossils in this cube though, especially not early in the draft. So I don't know if that would be my pick. The Cherubi, or is it? No, it's Cherim. Cherubi's the evolution. Allows your fire and your grass types to get buffed an extra damage. So I mean, that could be good in multiple directions here. So it's tough. There's like a lot of ways you can go. You could go really heavy into Kabutops early if you wanted to. You could go more into trying to get into maybe Arcanine or maybe Typhlosion or Crobat with the Cherim. But I just feel like for my money, I want to take AZ. I think that effect is so good in so many decks. I find the scoop up effect in general just insane. When you have so many damage, you just deny a prize. There's lots of like enablers you can put that with too. Like Arcanine's really nice if you can AZ the Arcanine and reuse the ability after discarding energy. Just being able to use it against like any like Pokemon that has like a good effect, like Unknown J. You can pick that up, do it again. You get a card out of your discard pile. Like there's lots of really good utilities for AZ. And I feel like it's like one of those cards that really stands out in a deck, and something that like I see AZ, I'm probably not getting too many chances to play a card like that. So I think I want to take that card early as opposed to like, something like Floatstone or maybe some of the other attackers. But really tough pack, and I'm really curious to see what you're wanting to take from this, Connor.
Yeah, so great analysis overall. I agree with pretty much everything you said. Bugcatcher, definitely really the only draw card in this pack, but it's a good one. Turns out draw 4 is the point at which a supporter starts to feel pretty good instead of feeling not so great in the case of draw 3. So always happy to have Bugcatcher. I play one in my deck. Wish I had more just because it's so nice. A costless draw 4 is just really good. Thunder Mountain Prism Star, super powerful card to have in Lightning, especially. Lightning being a very aggressive deck on its own, so Thunder Mountain really lets you even lower, or get those costs even lower, which can be a huge benefit. I wouldn't really consider Seeker over AZ. AZ is certainly the better of the two, and one of the most powerful utility supporters in the cube. Another card that I've played a ton in my own deck this time around and in the tests. And then Kabutops and Cherim are definitely the best Pokemon here. Kabutops being a part of, the Kabutops archetype. It basically enables itself. I am higher on Kabutops in this cube than you are, but I do think it has some flaws that can be a little bit difficult to get around, and ultimately it does have some bad matchups that are basically unavoidable. Those being things like Cherim, and even just decks that are fast in general can be difficult for Kabutops if it can't keep energy in play enough. So it's a very good deck for sure, but I would not be as inclined to take it pack 1, pick 1. Unless I was just really in the mood for Kabutops, which I wouldn't blame anybody for taking Kabutops pack 1, pick 1. It's a very good card. It's a very good deck, but it's not where I am generally going to be in this cube. And I would say, though, my pick would be the Cherim. Because Cherim is a very, very powerful card in 4 different decks. And those decks being Crobat, Arcanine, Typhlosion with the big fire basics, and Cherim itself. You can actually just play a 4 of Cherim line, which we actually see in this month's Cube League, and it's 2-0. It's doing really well. And the Cherim in itself is just a very good card. So when I take Cherim, I know there are going to be 4 archetypes that I can look to be in, where that's going to be a really powerful card, and it's going to give me some significant advantages over other decks in the field, and that's just a great place to be. So I like the AZ pick a lot. I think it's the best general purpose pick, but my pick is going to go to Cherim in this pack.
Yeah, definitely well said. Cherim would be like my second pick, I think. I just feel like I'm definitely, especially as we go through these pack 1, pick 1s, I tend to just be very general, I think, on the first pack, which I think either way, I mean, depending on which way you want to spin it, like it's both decisions are fine. There's definitely rationale behind both of them, but I'm just noticing a trend for myself that I do tend to just stray more like, non-specific in the first pack. But I could definitely see taking Cherim. I was thinking about it too. It's like, yeah, I mean, you could definitely, I wouldn't even call it like a narrow pick. Like you have so many options with Cherim as well, and it's a card that is going to enable you to play even more busted, powerful decks. So makes sense.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at too. When it's the example of, really, we can see it in this pack right here, Kabutops versus Cherim. Kabutops, really powerful stage 2, possibly one of the strongest lines in the cube, definitely going to be able to build a good deck if you get more of the line, but it doesn't really work with other stuff. Like, Kabutops is a self-contained package. You can pair it with a couple of other things. My favorite partner for it is Miss Magius, because that helps keep the energy in play, and it can also synergize with some of the spread stuff with Choppa. Either way, Kabutops is pretty much going to be a Kabutops deck. There's no versatility to that. Whereas Cherrim is a really powerful stage 1, and it also goes into 4 of, I would consider, very powerful decks in the cube. Each of those 4 decks is independently very powerful. They don't need the same pieces as the other ones. So I'm going to be able to look a lot of different directions to get there. And while AZ is totally open, and it will probably go in any deck that I build, Cherrim, to me, and this is how I kind of think as a drafter, Cherrim is going to make my deck better than the decks of the people around me. Whereas AZ, it might. But Cherrim, in this cube especially, so many attackers are like 10 damage away from critical knockouts, especially in the types that Cherrim exists in. Being able to get to those numbers can give you just a really threatening deck. And those are kind of the things that I look out for. So I remember a while back, we had a Crack-a-Pack from the Gen 7 cube, and I said I would have taken the Altaria, because Altaria is a very, very powerful card in both Alolan Exeggutor and in Como. And it's the same case here, where Cherrim is a very, very powerful card in 4 separate decks. Even though AZ is more versatile, it's also very good. The reason why I gravitate toward Cherrim is because I think the advantage of having Cherrim in the deck in the end is going to be greater than the advantage, or than the risk of potentially not playing it.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that perspective too. I was also looking through the packs from the league at people were going through, and it's funny because the Kabutops and the Cherrim were actually both taken in the first packs. I don't know in which pods respectively, but it's just kind of funny that those were both actually pack 1 picks, which makes sense. We've talked about them both, but it's kind of interesting to see. People might be going through the same sort of rationale and when they see these cards as well. So kind of a neat thing to see in practice.
Yeah, it's I think it's very exciting, and I don't know, really, really interesting to think about. And I really loved that visual of all of the different pack 1 pick ones. I'm very interested in your process on that, because I tried to replicate it and I couldn't get there. So I want to know how you did it. But that's for outside of the podcast for sure. And either way, if you have not looked at that visual yet, I assume it's on Twitter. Yes. But it's at least in the Cube Discord. So definitely take a look at that. It's just a really cool thing to see.
So yeah, I think we've talked long enough about this, so we're going to be wrapping up this segment. But stick around, because when we come back, we're going to be talking about balancing blunders. Some of the balancing blunders might already be making too, so you don't want to miss that. Stick around, we'll be back soon. All right, welcome back to our main segment. So this has been a topic that I've been really excited to talk about because I feel like it's really applicable. It's something that I've definitely obviously gone through, and I'm sure Connor's gone through as well. As a cube builders, as like anybody, you're gonna make mistakes, and over time, you tend to see patterns. You tend to see a lot of trends happening here. So today, what we're gonna unpack is just like common cube balancing mistakes that tend to have like kind of a big a big effect on cubes. So as we get into these, they're going to be a bit exaggerated for what it's worth, for the sake of explanation, but you can take any piece of it and apply it to your own cube. And these might be mistakes you've made or mistakes that you might be making at the current time. So, but none of this is like strictly all bad. Like there's definitely a line to like where some of this becomes a problem, but just take these examples and apply it to your own cube, and hopefully you'll see what I mean when we get through it. So basically what we'll do is I'll explain what it is and talk about like why we do it. So I'll explain some of the rationale behind why we make some of these mistakes, and then why it really doesn't work. So and then we'll be able to point out like some ways to like actually go about balancing. So a lot of these are just mistakes that we've made along the way, and like maybe like a different, like a bad thought process. So hopefully this will be able to translate over the time here. So the big balancing blunder, the first one I want to talk about is the 1 card counter. So the one card counter is something I've seen a lot, and it is a common practice. It happens all the time. So you don't feel bad if you've done this before. But it's using like one or multiple cards to put in a cube with the intention to counter something in particular, like maybe a certain archetype. These can be tech cards like the Alkaji level X, Guardian's Rising Machoke, Guardian Rising Sudowoodo, maybe even like Bench Barrier Mew. You can't see where I'm going with that. So usually what happens is like maybe there's like a really popular spread deck that tends to win, and a lot of times what we see here is like we'll tech in our cube something that's, you know, auto counters that. So maybe you have like Flygon in your cube with Sandslammer, so you put in like a 2/2 line of Guardian's Rising Machoke to counter that.
Yeah.
What oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just finishing the thought. You're good to go.
Sure. Yeah. So the one card counter is definitely a pet peeve of mine in particular, because somebody could have like a totally well drafted, well composed, well, you know, thought out, strategized deck. And they can come to the table, and then there can be one single card in their opponent's deck that just makes theirs not work. And that's really not a fun experience at all. It invalidates that player's whole drafting experience. It is not a skillful interaction. One side of the table just wins the game because they have one specific counter, and there's really nothing that can be done about that. And it's just not fun for either side. You know, a good game is not played. There's no, special consideration or skill or anything like that beyond like, I want to put this card in my deck in the deck building period. So that's kind of where I come from on it. And I think that we've spoken about it, and you echo a lot of the same thoughts.
Oh, definitely. So really, why do we do it? It's like, you know, it happens a lot. It happens to the best of us. And it's a common practice. And really because it makes sense in theory. So if you think about it, you know, I like using Flygon as an example because it's very obvious. So Sandslammer's stupid strong ability can be really good. So what's the best way to counter that and make it, you know, less good, I guess, or, you know, lower the win rate? And that's adding something that just stops the damage counters being put on the play. So in theory, it's like, okay, I add in this Machoke, now Sandslammer, now people have combats for Machoke. And, you know, if a certain deck's winning a bunch, or we're worried about a deck being too good, often these counter cards offer a chance to contest it and quote unquote balance the cube. And really that's just, and in fact, I mean, that can happen. So like if you add in a direct counter to Flygon, it's going to win less, right? But it doesn't necessarily work. And Connor already touched on that a bit. And just to reiterate some points too, it's when you do the one card counter in particular, it's a band-aid fix. So doing so does not really deal with the balancing problem. In this example, Flygon maybe is too good, or it's an OP card. It's just not balancing the cube. So what you're doing is that card is still broken in the sense that it's still going to have a high win rate, that it's had a high win rate, and that it could be oppressive, but it's just going to win less because of these because the counters to it are just going to, like, you know, halt it at its tracks. So it doesn't necessarily fix the problem of the card being too good. And the real problem is, and the Connor hit on it like dead on, is that it takes a lot of the skill out of those matchups. So like Connor said, like when you get into those matchups where someone just has that one card counter to your deck because you know, we're trying to make sure that deck doesn't win as much, like it doesn't feel like that great. So playing an auto win card in like a matchup with little to no counterplay can make players feel frustrated for investing themselves in a certain deck. And I think, you know, that's the point I'm trying to hit here, is that when you're thinking about how players interact with your cube and you're thinking about balancing, when you add in those like one card counters, you're essentially leading these players into those decks that are being countered into sort of a trap, because while you can't predict that everyone's going to have the counter, those certain decks will, and cube's not really a format where you're playing like 9 rounds. So like one loss can be a big deal, and you're investing a lot of time into cube when you go and actually draft, you know, 2 to 3 hours of your day, at least, if not more, spent, you know, building the deck that you've drafted. Just to have it lose to one card is super frustrating and can be super demoralizing. And that's really not the environment you want to create. All this aside from the fact that you're not actually addressing the problem that X card is too good. So what I suggest, and I'm interested to hear Connor's thoughts after this, is if a card's too good that needs a counter, then maybe it shouldn't be in the cube. So like if Sand Slammer is way too good and it just is leagues above where the rest of your lines are at, I would just cut it. Because if you're just trying to Band-Aid fix it with these like counter cards that you have to play, then it's just not worth having it in your cube. So if something's unintentionally dictating the direction of your cube, that might be the best step, to just take it out or adapt the cube. Like you also don't have to necessarily cut it, but you need to maybe adjust your cube to fit within that line. Because sometimes you want lines to be this presence in your cube. Like maybe you want something to be like, a known force that you want people to have to play around or think about. And that can be fun. That can be interactive. But if something's too good and you don't intend for it to be that good, that you have to make it so that people have to build their decks a certain way to deal with it. That's usually where the problem starts. And that's where you want to look at and say, okay, what can I do? Can I at least, make the other lines more capable of dealing with it? Like maybe do my lines need to be a little bit higher powered? They need to be a little bit lower powered for a different situation. I mean, you just got to think about your cube in general, besides just adding little Band-Aid fixes, because at the end, it doesn't actually fix the problem. It just makes it so the deck wins less, but then it creates a little bit more of a worse cube experience. So that's my thoughts on the one card counter. Connor, I know you touched on this before. Anything like you feel about this card? Anything that you see like coming up with that in cubes?
Yeah, so when you boil down the one card counter, what it is, especially if you've added the one card counter to contest an archetype that is very powerful or is too powerful, what happens is you have two cases that become very common. These aren't the only cases, but they are going to be the dominant portion of the time. Case one is the very good card plays against the counter. We've talked about why that's not fun, so I'm not going to go into it too much, but, back it up a couple minutes if you want a quick refresher on that. So that's not a fun case. Case two, the card does not play against its counter. Now you have a card that is too powerful playing against a deck that cannot answer it. And that's also not fun. That's a situation where one player is just going to get blown out because the opponent has a card that's too good. So, and that makes up a fairly large portion of the cases when that card ends up being played. And a lot of the time what you'll see is players, start to pick at it in the draft and try and make it not come together. And even these are not necessarily fixes on the cube builder's part. These are the drafters trying to correct for the mistakes of the cube builder. So don't put your cube in this situation. If you see cards that are too powerful, you see cards that are difficult to interact with, then really consider whether it's possible to interact with those cards in a way that doesn't just shut them down completely. And so that kind of moves me into my next point, which is find softer counters. So one example is I had a condition theme in my cube. I still do. And certain archetypes were very bad against conditions. So Regigigas Level X, for example, is a very, very bad deck to play against conditions. But what I did instead of, I considered a couple of things. There's a Comfey that when a Pokemon has a fairy energy attached to it, it can't be affected by special conditions. And I thought, okay, this could be a way for Regigigas to deal with special conditions and go about its day and continue to work as a deck. But in practice, what happens is if somebody has that Comfey, it doesn't even need to be in a Gigas deck. They can just say, okay, I auto-win poison, and that's it. So I ultimately didn't include the Comfey in my deck, and I went with, I believe there's a tool called Healing Scarf. It's like when you attach an energy, you heal a condition. And there's also, I think, a Gigas that does something similar, a base Gigas that heals a condition when you attach. So essentially, Gigas has counterplay now, but the game's not over as soon as that counterplay comes into effect. And Gigas still gets to play the game. Poison still gets to play the game. You still don't want to play against Poison as Gigas, and you still might want to answer that matchup in other ways, but you have tools that you can use, and they're interactive. Poison can remove the tool. You can play recovery for the tool, things like that. Things back and forth interactions that make games skillful, make games interesting, and make sure that both players actually get to play their game. So those are the kinds of things. I really like tools in stadiums in cases like that, just because those cards are very interactive. But there are lots of different ways you can go about it. maybe a version of an ability that's less powerful than another version of the same ability, things like that. So just keep that in mind. And while you should not be afraid to remove the card, you could also look for softer solutions as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, just because it shows that, I mean, everything, like, both pieces in that example can coexist. So, and when you're really looking at your cube, you want to make sure you're, if you really care about a line, and the line, you really want to see that kind of archetype be in the cube. Like, I definitely agree with what Connor's saying. Like, try to find responses that aren't just like matter of fact, like straight up shut down this one archetype. Like things like the, like the built-in Gigas can deal with the poison. Like that's honestly like one out that the Gigas has, but it still has to worry about the level, sometimes level execution. You won't always have that Gigas available to you. You still have to worry about counterplay. Like you want to be thinking about your cube in that respect. Like what can lines do to like help combat some of these strategies without making the strategies that bad. So yeah, I think definitely a great example to go off there.
Yeah, but those are my thoughts on that one. Do you want to move on to the next point on our list?
Yeah, so the next cube blunder, or building blunder, or balancing blunder, one of the blunders I'm blundering that I want to talk about is the atomic nerf. All right, so the atomic nerf, what it is when you're nerfing a line that is previously too strong to the point where it's too weak or barely playable. So sometimes this is an overcorrection, or we remove an important card to the line without realizing it. That the line can't really function. So I mean, a lot of cube lines are like Jenga. Some pieces you can take out and the whole thing falls apart. So you got to be really careful. But this happens a lot, and usually it happens when a line becomes overpowered. And this is one of the obvious solutions to take, because if we make the line weaker and so the playing field's more even, it'll be fine. And sometimes the line becomes very overpowered. We try to water it down extra hard, make sure its power ladder stays in line. I mean, this is just usually the thought process of when we get freaked out because a powerful line is getting too good. And it makes sense, like in theory, right? You see like think about something like my example, like Gyarados was in my cube for a long time. And it used to be, I had 2 copies of Tail Revenge, which looking back is insane, but it was a different time, right? But, it got to a point where that line was just so dominant, so oppressive. There's only a handful of decks that can really compete with no energy cost attacks that does like one-shots on your whole board. It was something crazy. And, getting nervous seeing it winning so much, you decided to go in a different direction with it, cutting out the Tail Revenges, trying to do what I could. And it became to a point where that deck was maybe like a tier 3 in my cube. Not something that you would particularly you would expect to win with. Something I don't even think really saw much play since I nerfed it. And while I accomplished my goal, the Tail Revenge was not winning as much. It was an oppressive force. It did just create this problem, though, where this line was just not very playable. So, I got a 6/4 line of a stage 1 that's not very good. That's 10 cards in the queue that no one wants to draft. So this kind of leads into like why the atomic nerf doesn't work. And it's because it solves a problem but creates another one. So while your cube may benefit from a powerful line being less dominant, if a tier done deck becomes a tier 3, then no player wants to draft it, and then it just becomes empty cards. And this is like the ultimate problem that we're dealing with here, is that if a line's not playable, it makes the draft that much harder, because while you had an extra line as an option for you whenever the line was good, you don't now. So as someone going through the cube draft, you have to think about, can I even afford to take this tier 3 line that's not going to even go 2-1 with? Like, no, of course not. So that makes people prioritize differently. Like, this would be a whole nother subject, but like unbalanced lines are problematic for that reason. So you can have an unbalanced line that's terrible because it's not on par with the rest of the cube. And that's like the same problem in reverse. So that's why the atomic nerf doesn't work. My suggestion is, there's always a reason why a line can be too strong. But if nothing else, if you cannot make an overpowered line fit nicely your cube, that's when you gotta start looking for options. But you don't always have to change out your lines too quickly. I don't recommend changing your lines on a dime, but explore your options, really. And this kind of harkens back to what we talked about in the previous one we talked about where it's just, you know, when you're talking about looking for soft counters, you also can look for subtle ways to maybe make the line better. Now, in my example, Gyarados was just not a good fit for my cube, and Gyarados itself did not sit nicely with anything else the cube could do. So that was something that, like, it's kind of just, you know, I need to switch out that line. But if there's a way to make the line work, you really take a second to dissect it and figure out where the line is being maybe too strong, or what other directions you can take to it. Are there other, like, cards you can make it, you know, balanced with? Is there a different power level you can sit at that maybe it doesn't shut out all your lines, but maybe some of your lines just need a little bit of a buff to it? So you got to look at the landscape of your cube. But what you just want to avoid is just taking that line that's too good and just watering it down to the point of where it's just not very playable. And again, a lot of these are over exaggerations, but this comes up a lot more than I would expect to see. And it's a common reaction to a line being too good, but you just want to make sure that you're not overdoing the amount of nerfing you have to do. So, I mean, that's my thoughts on it. Connor, I'm interested to see what your thoughts are, if you've ever encountered this before.
Yes, the atomic nerf, it's, I don't think anyone ever does it on purpose. People nerf something because it's too good and they want that to be more balanced, but even a lot of the time, I think a mindset that is easy to fall into is I don't want people to play this line as much. And when you get into cases like that, that's where the atomic nerf, I think, becomes a much more likely outcome. Because at that point, you've shifted your mindset from I need to figure out a way to make this slightly less powerful to I want to make it so that people don't want to draft this as much. And it's easy to do, and like people always want to see variety in their cubes, and you know, there's nothing wrong with wanting to see variety, but just don't let it come at the cost of the experience of your cube. You know, we've talked about people not wanting to play a deck that has been atomically nerfed, but the other case, and the case that I see a lot, and the case that I've been victim of as well, is drafting a line that has been nerfed very severely that you didn't know was nerfed that badly. So, for example, actually going off the Gyarados example that Andrew talked about, I was drafting Gyarados in a revised version of his cube a couple years back, and I had what I consider to be a pretty good Gyarados deck. I had 4 Magma base, I had, you know, full Gyarados line, all that good stuff. And then I actually started playing it, and I realized that Gyarados was just not on the same level as the other decks in the cube, and I had a very unfortunate draft experience. I'm sure I was not a pleasant person to be around. And I've been in that situation a lot. I know a ton of people have been in that situation. Anytime you have a line that is wildly out of balance, you make it so that if anyone drafts that, they're not going to have a fun play experience. And that's really the ultimate thing you want to avoid anytime you're building a cube. So just keep that in mind. Definitely consider when you're nerfing a line whether your attitude toward it is different. I mean, you know, if you really hate a line in your cube, just take it out. Like, switch it out with a totally different line. I know with Garchomp Sea Level X in my cube, I didn't want that really to be a deck ever again, so I just took it out completely. Even though, you know, maybe I could have thought about ways to balance it, maybe remove like the multi-energies or whatever. But I just wasn't interested in doing that. I didn't like the gameplay experience that it provided, so I just removed it. And there's no rule that says you have to keep a certain card in your cube. As long as the decks are in line with each other, you know, roughly, that's the most important thing. As long as people are having a good time, that's the most important thing. So those are my thoughts on the atomic nerf.
Yeah, and like the point I do want to just drive home to is like, and again, this could probably be an episode in itself, but like an unbalanced line, whether it's too good or too bad, is super like detrimental to the cube, like the draft experience. So when you make these changes, like if a line, if we end up making a line too weak, that was previously too strong, it just changes the dynamic of how people approach the draft. And it could just lead to a very unsatisfying draft experience. So if you have a cube out there and you're unsure about a line being, you know, if you know of a line at least that is like maybe just either on the too high or the too low spectrum, like really take a look at it, because it can really change the way people enjoy your cube. And at the end of the day, that's all we really want to see, is people enjoying, our cubes and having a lot of fun. So just something, I just want to highlight, with the yellow highlighter, just saying, like, look at your unbalanced lines and make sure that you are, sanding those off, making sure that they are right in par, because they are going to be changing a lot of stuff with your cube draft. But moving on. So our next one, and Connor, I know we've talked about this before a lot, and that's coddling the draft. And what I mean by that is making the draft too easy or less engaging. So this can be from giving players too many cards at the start of the draft, making it maybe too easy to find like consistency, maybe adding in a lot more powerful trainers, adding a way to acquire a lot of cards before or after the draft, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Just want to make sure that that's definitely not a bad thing. Like a Rochester or a shop are not a bad thing, but hear me out here. None of these are bad, but what can happen is when we coddle the draft too much, we make the draft less fun. So I played in quite a few cubes. I mean, my own cube had a fixed Rochester for a while, and I played in lots of cubeless shops that I really enjoyed, because I thought they added an extra dynamic to the cube. But what happens is, and what can happen in some of these cases, is you get too much stuff from the Rochester or the shop or the draft itself. So, like, if you think about if a cube gave you, like, 4 Colress, 4 Juniper, 4 Ultra Ball, you wouldn't really feel compelled to draft any more consistency, right? Like, you have your whole engine right there. So, and that's an over-exaggeration, but we do see this from time to time where cubes just give off way too many cards at the front, because maybe they're worried about decks not coming together. They're worried that people aren't going to be able to draft the deck they really want to. It's usually coming out of a fear of not getting the experience they're hoping for. So maybe this tends to happen at more of the novice cube level, where people are newer and they don't quite understand drafting yet. But as time goes on, those cube drafts can turn into really unsatisfying experiences, because you're hoping to, at least apply a little bit of your skills here when you're drafting as you get better, applying the techniques maybe you're learning at the podcast, maybe you're learning at the table. When you're giving off too many cards, it begins to become boring. So that's really why it doesn't work when you're coddling the draft, is it makes the drafting boring. So there's not a lot of skill involved in a draft that is almost handed to you, right? And it can make the time invested less rewarding. It also creates a problem where the lines are, only the perceived lines really get looked at, because there's like no incentive to play any other stuff, or it gets, there's no really reason to get experimental. So that's just something that you tend to see, just because the players aren't as invested. And what I suggest here, if you're afraid that maybe your decks, you're seeing decks don't come together as well, or you're not seeing players really get into lines smoothly, there's a few things I want you to look at. So first of all, you need to figure out if and why players are having consistency issues. I would advise looking at their deck lists for sure. And if you can even swing looking at their draft pools, if they haven't shuffled them, you can maybe have them leave them out. If you're curious, obviously don't be rude, don't be condescending, but I'd also take a step back and consider the average skill level of who's at the table. Like inexperienced players or players that are new to draft, more often than not, will probably have less consistent decks if they haven't really cubed before. Now, we can see from the Discord, a handful of people come into this cube Discord, clearing house. Like you think about people like Best Palau, honestly, is a great example. Like not all players come into this cube without, with making, consistent decks, but, some people do. So that's not always a good indicator, but if your player group is very new to cube, that might be a reason why. Or if your cube, and if you feel like your cube is on par with others that you've seen as far as consistency goes, as far as your line counts go, then you're probably okay on consistency. You don't need to be handing out as many cards. And understand that as your play group gets better with time, but they won't improve as much if they don't have to think and improve at cube. So what I mean by that is, like, if you're spoon feeding them lines, spoon feeding them like trainer stuff, they don't ever learn those drafting skills. So, where you'd expect people to get better at cube over time by drafting and, trying out different strategies and, learning from mistakes and stuff. If you don't let them make the mistakes and let them really understand why maybe they're not getting the exact pieces they're hoping for, they're just never going to grow. And and I say this in the situation where it's usually, maybe it's a little bit different now that we have the Cube Discord, but Cube used to be a very community-based thing. So if one person had the cube at a cube, everyone was getting the cube experience from one specific cube. So maybe it's maybe a little bit of a dated opinion. Kind of, you'll have to check me on that. But I feel like if you are introducing people to the format, they're kind of reliant on you as far as the cube builder and your cube to teach them. So if you spend too much time coddling the draft, it just ends up being a huge backfire in terms of like long-term growth of your cube experience. So, I mean, that's all of my thoughts summed up. And Connor, I know you've talked about this before, so I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about the coddling the draft.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, the draft is a huge part of the fun of Cube. And the variety that can result in decks is a huge part of what defines the format. You know, you don't want people to leave the draft with the same kind of deck. You don't want strategies to overlap too much. You want people to be doing different things. You want different decks to take shape, and that's part of the fun. Like, that's one of the things that makes the format so much more enjoyable than something like Standard, where you see the same decks all the time. And giving people free cards will absolutely contribute to the same decks taking shape every time. So I like free cards when they allow an archetype to exist. So, for example, in Davi's RSPK cube, you get 4 React Energy for free. Most decks not going to play React Energy, but the decks that need React Energy don't want to have to draft every single one of those because they're very weak cards in the draft itself. And that puts an additional level of pressure on a deck that is not any better than the other decks in the cube, just because they have to draft the reacts there. Now, there are different cases where, you could have an archetype that if the archetype has like 4 pieces and it gets all 4, then it's nuts. But you expect it to get 3, and then it's worse. And in that case, you want to put those pieces in the draft. But in the cases of things like React Energy, or in my cube, I give out Special Darkness Energy for free because it's part of the Dark archetype. I like free cards in those cases because they're not going to end up in everyone's decks. Like, everyone is not going to play Special Darkness Energy. Everyone is not going to play React Energy. But it allows lines in Dark typing, that use React Energy, that use Special Metal, that use different Hole-in Energy, all of these different cards that I've seen used for free. Those I like quite a bit. Cases that I don't like are when you get huge chunks of your trainer line for free, when you get all of the basics underneath stage 2. Now, there are some cases where that can be fun. If you intentionally are making a cube that's supposed to have a ton of different lines, then that can be just fine because, it allows you to essentially just put a bunch of line toppers in, and then people have some really wild looking decks in the end because that's the goal. But in a more traditional style of cube, I don't like that because it reduces difficulty in the draft, it reduces skill, it reduces the level of decision making that goes on. If you don't have to get your stage 1s and basics, then you can pretty much always just focus on like consistency or like utility cards or whatever. You don't have to evaluate the level of importance of each of these things, and a lot of these micro level decisions separate some of the best drafters from like mid-tier drafters and below that. So those kind of things I think are really important. They make a huge portion of the fun for me, so always going to be thinking about those things. But at the end of the day, the number one thing I dislike about free cards is that they make decks feel the same. They make the play experience feel the same, and it's just not that fun. So one massive offender, and I know that this is like part of the point of the cube, but I think it illustrates the point really well, is Zoroark cube. It's a cube that a lot of people have played, so it's why I'm going to use it as an example. Zoroark cube traditionally involves getting a free 4/4 Zoroark line. It involves getting 4 double colorless energy. It involves getting essentially a very strong trainer base for free, and you go from there. So the problem that happens with Zoroark cube is that decks end up playing very similarly. They end up back and forth. Essentially, who sets up first is at a tremendous advantage. the player who goes first is at a tremendous advantage, things like that aren't really skillful. And then in addition, if certain strategies are very powerful in an environment like that, for example, in Zoroark Cube, fighting types are extremely powerful. Every single person is heavily incentivized to take those fighting Pokemon because you know that they're going to hit weakness on a ton of the cube. So things like that happen as well. You know, in Zoroark Cube, it's very overt. Like, obviously, fighting types are going to be good if everyone's playing a 4/4 Dark Line. But there can also be more narrow cases where, you know, maybe you give people some very powerful trainers, but then you have some Pokemon that can like disrupt the trainers in some way. I don't know. It's a little bit, it's very case by case. But the point is, it reduces variety of the play experience, and variety of the play experience is such a huge part of the format. So that is where I'm coming from with the free cards and the coddling the draft.
Yeah, I'm actually super glad you brought up Zoroark Cube, because that was actually the example I had in my mind when I was thinking about this experience, something I've seen, because that cube in particular, from what you pointed out, is like, you know, everything becomes very linear and very, you know, samey, and it does inhibit a lot of the strategy. And I've seen this come up before with other cubes, taking sort of inspiration from it, where it's like, well, let's just give players, you know, all of the lines they need when they take the stage 2. It's like, whereas you miss out on so much of the decision making when you do that. So, yeah, no, really, really glad you brought those up.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on Zoroark Cube specifically, but I'll save those. Either way, I think there's definitely a lot to go over about why this is something that you want to avoid. You know, exceptions being very inexperienced player bases and things like that. But even in those cases, I think it's better to migrate them away from that kind of starting point over time.
Yeah, and I think that's also something too. Like, if you want to start out, maybe like giving players a little bit of direction, like in the beginning when they're first learning. Like, yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I think the thing you got to keep in mind though is that, like, if you make the cube, if you consistently keep the cube at an easy, you know, a super easy draft that you don't have to think much with, like, you don't ever grow. So if you expect your player base to grow with you and you want to get better at cube, like, you have to consider, like, what are they going to learn from, right? They're not going to learn anything from having to just get a line for free, because that's not, you know, and 90% of cubes out there, that's just not realistic. Like, you're going to have to draft your basics and stage 1s, right? So you might as well, if you're trying to grow in cube, you know, have to deal with that experience. And if it means someone doesn't get the line that they wanted to draft, it's like, well, tough. That's not really what cube is. That's not really what, you know, you come to expect in cube. In cube, you kind of expect to get, you know, the line that you drafted the best. So you got to think about that experience and how it applies there. And I also just want to reiterate that, you know, shops in Rochester's aren't bad. In fact, I've seen them work in a lot of cubes. So if your cube has a shop at Rochester, you know, that's fine. Just, you know, make sure that you're not making it so easy that a just scrambled mess could come together in the shop at Rochester. Like, if there's like no downside to just drafting poorly, then that's kind of an indicator, right, that there's not a lot of skill. So in 90% of cases, I think it's fine with shops and Rochester. Just make sure you're just really cognizant of the experience you're creating. You know, I think I just think that's fair.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot to it, but ultimately getting your players to a place where they can enjoy the most varied and the most skillful experience they can is going to be more rewarding for them in the long run. It's going to be more rewarding for you in the long run too.
Right. No, I definitely agree. So the last balancing blunder I want to talk about, it's something that I want to make sure that people understand. It's not something that happens at, like, you know, the most matter of fact level, but it's something you want to consider closely when you're making changes to your cube, and that's called the panic switch. What I mean by that is when you're switching on a line too quickly, or either immediately after a cube session or before it's even drafted. So usually it's done out of, you know, fear, out of a card being unbalanced, and that's not always a bad thing, right? If ADP is in your cube, and clearly ADP should not be in your cube, you don't have to make everybody go through the process of drafting the cube with ADP to figure that out. So I'm not talking about cases like that. So in cases where you can clearly definitively tell that a card's too good, like already forget about those. Like, those obviously aren't mistakes, but it's usually something that we feel like it could have an issue, but like we aren't sure. So in order to like, you stave off any fear of something being broken, we immediately cut it. And that's, again, I don't want to sound like working right, but it's not always a bad thing. But usually I see this happen though a lot though, where players will be fairly aggressive and just cutting something without even trying it. And it's usually just done out of just fear of unbalance, which isn't a bad thing, but it can lead to some problems. So let me explain. When you make big changes to a cube, that being like changes to an entire line or the way they function, off little bits of information about your cube itself. So let's just say you have a new cube and you tested it once and something just seemed like it was just, it went 3-0 and it was just so good. So you're like, well, I need to either, nerf that line or I need to cut it and switch it out because it's too good. You're actually doing yourself a little bit of disservice. And here's why. So as your cube develops, your cube has its own meta, right? So players don't understand your cube at the start. Like usually players have to draft your cube maybe once, maybe twice to really get what your cube's about. Assuming your cube's, assuming your cube hasn't been drafted a lot before. So something like, Connor's cube, I mean, a lot of us have drafted his cube and seen his cube, so we'll understand that a little bit better the first time around than maybe, a fresh cube. But, keep in mind, let's just assume players have no idea what your cube's about. So that means the first draft is going to be way different than the second draft, because the second draft, players are going to understand, oh, wow, okay, that's what this card does. Oh, this deck is actually really cool. Let me try to get into this line. So a line itself that's dominating the first week, if you draft that cube again the next week, might not be as good, just on the simple fact that players now understand those types of decks. So you don't want to be changing out your lines too hastily, I should say, because it can really ruin the development of your cube, and it does hurt the amount of information you're getting. So again, if you know a line, if clearly a card is too good, then like by all means, yeah, cut it. Make the changes you need to. But if you are unsure, it's definitely not too bad to maybe try that line out again and see what happens. Because what's the worst thing that's going to happen, right? Yeah, maybe players won't enjoy maybe playing against something, but it could also be the case where, okay, maybe this line isn't as bad as I thought. So I just recommend taking each cube session with a grain of salt. But try to extract as much information as you can. So I definitely am a huge advocate for asking questions either during or after the draft of how did this line feel? How did you feel playing against this deck? And then also just trying to look at maybe the story of your cube and like what happened during that drafting period. So, was there like one, ace player and then a bunch of newcomers? Was there, some people, trying to maybe meme or, maybe there were some random things that happened that maybe caused a certain line to get boosted up a lot more, tons of things can happen, and it doesn't necessarily mean a line's too good. So kind of an example I have is over the past Cube League and Mike and JL's Delta Mutant Cube. Like I felt like I drafted a pretty insane control deck. Something that was just like I don't think I could have ever envisioned getting the amount of pieces I got, which it was pretty lucky on my part. I got past Pidgeot late into the last pack, and then Macargo right after it, and then I got Porygon early. I got Sableye early. Like you couldn't have asked for. I mean, it just came together really well. And I've gotten the question several times. It's like, that deck felt, gross and very unfun to play against and kind of degenerate. Like, what needs to be cut from the cube? And my answer had nothing to do with any of the cards that were like already like Sableye was fine, Pidgeot was fine, Macargo was fine. Yeah, I think Salamence was too good, but that had to do with more just how it interacted with the cube. But Salamence didn't necessarily make my deck broken. But in that particular instance, like, you could look at Control and be like, yeah, Control's nuts. Like, it needs to be nerfed. But, like, really, it just happened to, the circumstance worked out where that set of cards ended up in my draft pool. That's really just never going to happen again. Unless, you get really lucky. So, if you just looked at that one cube draft and said, yeah, these cards all need to get cut, it actually seems like a bit of a mistake, right? Because you're going off such little information. And the whole point of the panic switch is, like, if you're cutting too early or making changes too drastically too early without any information to go off of, like that's when you're starting to hurt the development of your cube, and you need to exercise a little bit more patience with it. So in the case where Mike and JL's cube, where I have, the control deck, you need to look at, okay, well, how did he get to that point? Is it likely that is that type of deck likely to come together again? And I feel like the answer is no, or at least not in that style. So that's something where like you don't need to make crazy cuts if that's not the kind of deck you want in your cube. It's very unlikely for that to come together. That I do think that like at that point, it's fine. You don't have to make insane changes. But some players might look at that and be like, okay, well, I need to cut Sableye, I need to cut Pidgeot, because you can't have those on a deck together. You see where I'm going with this? You gotta give it a little bit more patience. So I mean that's my thoughts on it. Connor, I'm interested to hear what you think about the Panic Switch.
Yeah, so I've always been of the school of thought, and I've always told people this: the deck that wins a cube should feel like it deserved to win the cube. Like, it should feel good. It should feel powerful, well built. Its strategy should be executed well. And in some cases, people are going to be upset that their opponent's strategy went off better than theirs, that their opponent's strategy was particularly good against theirs, things like that. And sometimes, you may feel that way as the cube builder. And those are times where you have to think, is this really broken? Or did this player just do an excellent job of drafting and building this deck? So an example that I have of that is Mike Gibbs's Champions Cube winning deck. I changed maybe one card in that deck, in the whole cube, because I looked at Mike's deck and I said, okay, this is essentially perfect. Like you can, there's almost no card in the entire cube you could possibly want that's not in this deck. And true enough, moving forward, that deck has not succeeded, dramatically since then. It was just an example of a very well constructed, very well executed deck. Conversely, I did end up nerfing some of the decks that came in beneath Mike's deck because they employed strategies that on their own were not fun or not fair. So, and those strategies, of course, they haven't succeeded since because they don't exist anymore. But I do think that it is very important to do your best to understand when somebody is upset because they lost, even when that may be you. I'm definitely somebody who's like that. When I lose, I really think hard about the reasoning for that kind of thing, and sometimes I can take it too personally and all that. It's important to realize when somebody has just done an excellent job versus when something is actually too powerful. So there's no fast and easy solution there. It's always going to be case by case, and you're not always going to make the right decision, and that's totally okay. It's, part of the cube building process. Just always be vigilant about it, always be conscious of it. And if you really truly don't believe something is too powerful, don't change it out after a single run. Now, if it wins 3 cubes in a row totally uncontested, then maybe it's time to reevaluate your opinion and really understand why that deck is winning so much. But like Andrew said, don't make too significant of a reaction as a Twitch reaction if you are truly certain that something is not too powerful, or you strongly believe it at least.
Yeah, and the thing I've noticed too is like it starts to become like a vicious cycle where you make one big change to the cube after one draft, but then that is also going to fundamentally change the way your cube works. So you draft it again, something else is going to become like, a lot better. It's like you're never going to get to that point where the cube, or I should say it's going to be really hard to get to that point where the cube's going to feel balanced or the cube's going to feel in line because, like I said in the beginning of this, your cube has a meta. And people are going to be learning about your cube each time they draft it. But if you expose them to do tons of new stuff every time they draft your cube, like they're never really going to figure out, what to go for or how each line works or how these, what matchups they need to be, considering when they're building decks. Like if you're constantly changing the landscape of your cube, they're never going to be able to, settle into something. So it becomes very unsure when you draft this. So you have to consider how that changes the player's perception of the lines. So that's why when you think about the Panic Switch, like obviously if something is clearly broken and it's proven itself to be too good, like okay, but like in most cases, it takes a few more drafts than just one to really understand if a line's playable, too good, too bad, to really figure out a line. So just execute patience when you're trying to figure out your lines. And it can be tough because no one likes being wrong and no one likes being the guy that has an unbalanced cube, right? No one likes being, no one likes feeling wrong in that respect, and that's okay. But and it's not like players hold you to that, that standard either. I think your player group will always understand if you're trying things or if you're, and sometimes you gotta be the one to push back and say, let me just try one more draft. Let me just give it some time before how it goes. Even if people are pushing for you to cut things immediately, like Connor said, they might have had a bad experience because they lost to it or something. You got as a cube builder, you have to understand that sometimes it's not always as simple as, okay, line is too good, must cut. Sometimes it takes a few more drafts, a few more understandings of how the cube works to really get to that point. So just kind of, echoing exactly what Connor said, just execute a little bit more patience with this. So don't make too many rash changes without having enough information to go off of.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is the most difficult point to discuss in this video, just because there is so much nuance to it. Sometimes a deck wins the cube and it is completely unfair and unfun, and you do need to change it after that one run or before the cube has even been run. One example is I saw in a cube that we were evaluating for test, there was a certain stage 1 line that just one-shotted every single Pokemon in the cube because of the cube's theme. And we told the cube builder about it, and they wanted to run the cube anyway without changing it, even though we really strongly recommended that they change it. And then what happened in the test? That line was first and second place. So it's you have to have reason. You have to let yourself be wrong in the sense that maybe you included a line that's too good and you need to change that. But it's also important to say, hey, this line really doesn't seem too powerful. I think this person just did a really good job with it. And it should stick around for a little bit longer so that we can see if it really is as good as some people think.
Yeah, that can be one of the toughest situations to be in, is evaluating the when it is too good or if it needs more time to test it. And I think honestly that just comes with experience. So the biggest takeaway from this and the panic switch is, even if you do switch out lines maybe a little bit too quickly, just understand in the back of your head that it learn from each experience. So even if I switch out a line too quickly and or if I left a line in that's too good, put that all as experience in your experience noggin, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. Just remember it. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to put if you accidentally put a line that's too good and it just happens to be that. But I also, on the flip side of that, if people are coming to you with, hey, I think this line is too good because X, Y, and Z, and they're bringing up fairly rational points to why the line is too good, don't be too off. I guess don't be too pushed backy on them, because they're just looking out for your best interests. And I think that's kind of the nuance to it as well, is you gotta know when if people are coming to you with very rational, very thought out reasons to why a line is too good, it is definitely in your best interest to hear them out and try to come into a consensus, because if you can look at the math, like Connor's example, this line is too good because X, Y, and Z. It's not luck that the line comes together. In that situation, you can look at it and say, oh, okay, you know what, I can definitely see that happening. Maybe the line should come out, and that is a case for switching out lines. But if you're going off more of maybe a feeling you're getting, or you're just too nervous that a line might be too good, that, I think in those situations you at least want to try it and see it, unless you have some really good evidence to go off of. So always err on the side of evidence, but don't be too quick to switch something out on a whim.
Yeah, definitely. And part of the fun of playing the same cube multiple times is kind of learning more about it and learning about the metagame and watching that develop. And if you make changes too regularly, then it can be difficult for that meta to develop. So just another thing to point out.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked long enough. This has been an exciting one for me. I've had a lot of fun talking about these different things. These have been things I've been, I guess, learning through my years of building cubes and trying to balance cubes. Balancing is no easy feat. Balancing is hard for any cube builder. It is just something you have to constantly think about and constantly be on top of. So if you feel like you're not the best at balancing, don't feel bad. Like that's part of the joys of owning a cube is you get to learn a lot more about how to balance. And it can take time. So hopefully these tips are helpful to you. Connor, any like last thoughts you want to give out before we cut to our conclusion?
An undercurrent of everything is you want it to be fun. And if everybody at your table's having fun, then that's the most important thing. Even if there is a line that's too powerful or not powerful enough, if everybody's having a good time, then you can at least rest easy on that. And at the end of the day, all of these changes that we recommend are in the interest of fun and competitive integrity. So just keep that in mind as you go. And if you really hold to that and make sure that those are your biggest goals, then I'm sure you're going to have just a fine time balancing your cube.
Yeah, I echo the same thoughts. And if you have any questions or want any more clarification on any of these things we talked about, again, you can reach us in the comments. You can find us in the Discord. We're very accessible. But yeah, that's going to do it for this segment. So stick around. We have a few announcements to make at the conclusion, and we'll talk about what's been going on in our lives. So we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to this conclusion segment. So important announcement. The Cube PQ podcast is going to be taking a little bit of a break just through the month of July. I'm going on vacation. I know Connor just got engaged. He has a ton of stuff he's going through. So we're both just taking a little bit of a break. That doesn't mean the podcast is going anywhere. The next episode will be coming out July 29th. So we're just missing one episode, but we'll be back right after that with our normal schedule. So nothing to worry about. Just taking a little bit of a break. I'm going on vacation, so I won't be able to record then either. And we got a lot of preparation going into Champs Cube as well. So kind of just like kind of have to do it this time. But you won't be missing any Cube content though. There's going to be a lot more coming on the YouTube channel. Hopefully by the time this goes up, maybe not, maybe later, but there's should be 2 new videos talking about some of the Cube League decks that we talked about on our live stream. We had some very exciting decks we looked at. One was the Complete Unknown deck, and another one was a Cherim deck, like completely Cherim, that Connor actually talked about in the Crack-a-Pack. So if you want to see what those decks look like and hear our thoughts on them, check out the YouTube channel. We are actually 6 at the moment, according to 6 subscribers away from 100. So if you haven't subscribed to us and want to, we really appreciate it if you did. We are so close to crossing that barrier, but of course, only if you want to, but you would make our day if you did. Anyway.
Even if you don't want to do it.
Yeah, that is now it's a demand. But yeah, we're so close, but we appreciate all the support we've gotten up to here so far. But yeah, I just want to reiterate, July 29th will be the next episode the podcast comes out. You can feel really cool if you made it this far, that that special information. So use it wisely. Don't tell anybody, it's a secret. So it's not. But let's get into, I guess, what's going on with our lives here now that we've kind of talked about everything. So if you made it this far, and we're going to stop talking about Cube content at this point. So if you get to this far at the conclusion, thanks for joining us. We're gonna kind of talk about what's been going on now for what's been going on in our lives. Oh my gosh, words. But yeah, Connor, what's going on?
Yeah. So goodness, what have I been doing lately? I know I've talked about it on the podcast before. I've been playing a DLC for Outward with my brother a lot. That's been a lot of fun. I've been playing Dragon Age Inquisition. I know that game is like 7 years old, but it's new to me, and I've been enjoying that a lot. Steam Summer Sale is on right now, so definitely been looking at games from that. I got one called One Step from Eden, which is like a roguelike card game, action game. I don't know, it's really unique, but it reminds me of the old Mega Man Battle Network games, which I thought were really great. So that's been a good time. I think that's about it lately. I don't know. I feel like time has been fleeting. I've been doing more in-person Cube. That's been a good time. Remembering how to draft in person, which has definitely been a learning curve once again. But yeah, how about you, Andrew? How have you been?
All right. So, I mean, the first thing is, we got to draft my cube at Yeti a few days ago, and that was great. It just felt every time you keep in person, it's just really great to get everybody back together. So that was a ton of fun. Like I said, I made a lot of changes to my cube since the previous iteration that people hadn't seen over a year or two. Oh gosh, I'm gonna say 1 year. Yeah, it's been 1 year, not two. Pandemic only lasted 1 year, right? So, but that was cool. It was really nice to see everybody. Of course, like, you know, our local game store now has tables you can sit at and play, so that's been cool. I've actually been playing some standard Pokemon, which is like not where I thought I'd be right now, because I've been kind of on a break ever since the pandemic hit, just because I've been really too invested in these formats recently. But honestly, Chilling Reign adds a ton of cool stuff to the format. I've been really enjoying the Urshifu Inteleon deck. For anyone that knows me even a little bit, I love Decidueye GX. It's like my favorite card they've ever printed, and I will play any deck that has that kind of effect in it, because it is just, to me, some very, very fun way to play the game. But even less so, like, their Urshifu deck just feels like I have so many like ways to approach a matchup. I felt like I had to really think about things, and that's something I haven't experienced in Pokemon in quite a long time, if I'm being honest. So I was definitely a huge fan. So actually been playing some IRL Pokemon too. Been playing with some friends up at my local game store, which is, I mean, it feels weird because we've been on pandemic for so long, and doing so would have been very bad before, but now everyone's vaccinated. So getting a little bit back to, you know, normal here. And of course, Pokemon made their first announcement, which is talking about Worlds. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that live events start coming back soon. I'm ready for that. Connor, have you played much Standard? I'm not sure if you're thinking about coming back or not to competitive.
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about coming back a lot, and I told Andrew before the podcast that I played PTCGO for fun for the first time in a very long time today. I played in a couple of the Players' Cups, but that was more competitive than just, you know, out of the joy of playing the game. And
yeah,
this time I actually just played because I wanted to play, and it was a good time. Format is neat. It's got lots of cool decks going on, and it seems like it's always evolving, which is really cool. It's not often that we see a format that changes so heavily, even like week to week, and this one definitely is like that. So very interesting. Lots of cool decks going on. I think content creation is in a really good spot too. I've really been enjoying watching Azul's videos, just seeing all the different decks out there and how a really skilled player might pilot them. So yeah, I have definitely been getting back into Standard as well, and I'll be looking forward to when in-person events are live again.
Yeah, I think for me, mostly, I miss the traveling. I miss going to new places and playing Pokemon with friends. Like, I went to a ton of regionals before. I probably plan on going to more regionals whenever it comes back. I probably said some other episodes too. I really miss going to live events again. They are just, I don't know. It's like the one thing that's missing from my life right now is going to, I guess, Columbus, Ohio, to go play in Internets would have been something I would have been doing a year ago. Or again, not a year ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I miss Internets. I miss Internets pretty bad.
Yeah.
So I'll be excited for that to come back.
Yeah, I wonder what the first event's gonna feel like, because, like, you know, everyone's like chomping at the bit to go back to live play. So I have to wonder if that first event somewhere accessible, like how big that event's gonna be.
Yeah, I imagine that event is going to cap on attendance, surely.
Yeah. The game's also gotten a lot more popular. I mean, I don't know if the game has, but Pokemon itself has exploded over the pandemic, as comes to no surprise from anybody who's been watching any news. So
yeah, any kind of media at all, really.
Right. You've heard Logan Paul plus Pokemon for like ever, but like, Pokemon's done a lot of cool stuff, though, to like bring people back in. That new set that we're going to be getting that has like old cards in it. Like, it's going to have Umbreon Star, like the base set Charizard, and like new cards that are like fashion like old ones. They were getting Dragapult Prime. Like, I got really big Evolutions vibes from that one. And like, Evolutions really blew up the game for like nostalgic reasons. So I wonder if this new set's going to bring in a whole new wave of people.
I'd be pretty happy to see just, you know, how the community has evolved over the course of the pandemic. You know, so many people have gotten into the game for the first time, gotten back into the game after a long hiatus, And the competitive scene, like, so collecting cards right now is very expensive, but the positive outcome of that is that getting cards for a competitive deck is very cheap. Even if you are buying like the newest, latest, and greatest deck, it's still only like $100 or two, probably closer to two. But that's like really affordable.
Yeah.
Especially in context of other games, but even in the context of the history of Pokemon. Like, used to be that, you know, you started a deck with 3 Shaymin EX that were $50+ and you went from there. And there's nothing even close to that now. Pokemon has been excellent at bringing the competitive scene to more people by printing products that have tons of great and cheap competitive cards in it that keep singles cheap for people that want to get into the game as well. A friend of mine, Zach Kreckler, who is, you know, part of the team that runs and owns Yeti Gaming, he said you can build Mad Party right now in its entirety for $18, which is absolute madness. I don't think there's ever been a time that the game has been as easy to get into as it has been right now, despite sealed product and collecting being so expensive. So I'm really excited to see how the competitive scene shapes out after all this and when people actually get back to IRL playing.
Well, so here's the other thing I find interesting, and it has to do with the pricing for regionals. Because something of important note is that regionals give out sealed product, and the price of sealed has gone up exponentially over like the recent Pokemon boom. So, like, it's kind of funny, and we wouldn't have expected this back in the day, but like if you got like maybe top 32 at a regional giving out team up, top 32 is giving out team up boxes, which are worth $1,000 each now. So the pricing now, I feel like, is worth a lot more if you're expecting to get maybe like a booster box or two, even without getting the actual cash prizes. So there might actually be even more of a monetary incentive to play the game now that sealed's gone up a lot more than where it's ever been.
Yeah, I have to imagine that pricing out for, you know, top 64, top 32 is going to feel pretty nice given how valuable sealed product is going to be. And it's going to be really exciting too, because, you know, the price of sealed product a lot of the time is driven by the price of the chase cards inside. And I'm not even talking about the competitive cards. I'm talking about like the big time collector cards. So even if you get like half a box and, you know, you can't really sell half a box because of scaling and all that, but you can still open it and it can still be fun because, you know, maybe you hit the chase collector card and you get some money out of that. So all in all, just, you know, surprisingly great for the competitive scene, how collecting has taken off and how sealed product has gained so much value, because it has made the competitive scene so much more accessible.
Yeah, so, I mean, Pokemon's definitely something I'm really excited about. The other thing I have to, this is completely 180 now, or changing directions, is the other thing that's been consuming my life is Bo Burnham's new special, Inside. Man, it's such a work of art. I really, like, the first time I watched it, you know, when you get the feeling you're watching something that is just like so special, I got that feeling watching his special here. It felt so real and so like he was being so vulnerable, and it was something that you could relate to, because even if I can't fully relate to everything he's going through, you know, the pandemic's been hard on a lot of us, and we all have gone through our peaks and valleys, and you know, him making this over the course of the pandemic, you can start to see, you know, we all kind of hit our breaking point. We hit our point where, you know, it gets tough, and he way he translates that through his music, it just really spoke to me. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Bo Burnham's Inside, as it's been like the only things I've been listening to for the past, I guess, week or so.
Yeah, I saw that came out, and I've always been a fan of his content in the past, so I'll have to give that a look for sure.
It is definitely different. Well, it's Bo Burnham, so it's still him, but man, it feels something very different than the previous stuff I've seen, and it hits a lot harder than a lot of his other things. So definitely be prepared to feel something. But it honestly, it's so good. He's got a lot of funny songs out there though, so it's not like all existential dread, but the existential dread is still not missed. But if you haven't checked it out, it's on Netflix. It's free. Well, I mean, not free, but you know, it's on Netflix. I don't know what I'm saying. Netflix isn't free.
Free with the purchase of a Netflix subscription.
Yeah, free if you have someone else's Netflix account. So, but if you have Netflix, I highly recommend watching it. It's honestly it's such a special thing to watch, and he made it all by himself. He filmed it all by himself and edited it by himself over the course of the pandemic, and that might not mean him a lot now, but if you see like what he's doing with the the cinematography, the lighting, it's a true production. So I thought that was really cool. You saw a little bit of his YouTuber side come out too, because that's where he started. It's just really cool. I mean, I if you haven't watched it yet, if you want to listen to it, it is on YouTube for free. The music is, and I think the music still is a really you can get the idea of what the special is about by listening to the music. So I mean, if you want to listen to it, you don't want to pay for Netflix, that's fine. Like, go check it out. I mean, if it's honestly you wouldn't regret it. So that's my recommendation. It's been the only thing I've really been watching, because I watched it I think 5 times now, just trying to understand all the little bits that he's got in there, because he puts a lot of depth in the different shots and the different stuff he does. So there's a lot of rewatch stuff you got to go back and see, like, oh, okay, what did he do here, and like why did he do that. So I've been sort of just digging my teeth in really hard into it, which has been fun. It's been really rewarding.
Yeah, it sounds great.
But outside of that, I mean, just surviving it tomorrow, I guess. But anything else before we close this one out?
No, I think I've covered all the bases.
Yeah, I think I have too. We're gonna take a little bit of a break though. July 29th. Just keep that one locked away. That'll be the next episode of the PQ Podcast. But if you want to, again, get more content, subscribe here on YouTube. We'll have a lot more coming with you. Maybe we'll throw a Twitch stream in there too, maybe. But definitely also, and I don't plug this enough, and I should, is check out the Twitter. Twitter is going to be popping. There's going to be a lot of new content for like Cube League coming out, for cubes that we've seen. Like, we really want to make sure that there's a resource for visual content from the podcast that we can't really go into. That's just time wise. So definitely check that out. But that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Again, you've been listening to PQ, the one and only Pokemon Cube podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.